Now tonight I'm going to be giving you, I'm going to be reading to you from something that I'm really not supposed to have here. And I think it's going to make some members of the Brotherhood extremely angry that I do have it, and that I'm going to read to you from it. The only problem in my mind is, where in the world do I start? This will, of course, illuminate you and bring you the true meaning of the lost word, the lost light, the secrets hidden behind the veil. Some of you may not have the slightest idea of what I am speaking. Others of you who have been listening to this broadcast for quite some time know that this is the ancient secret doctrine of the mysteries. Now, I find it quite remarkable that the actual doctrine of the ancient pagan religions and the mystery schools is quite different from the propagandized and, again, deceptive teachings that are given to the initiates of the secret fraternities, the Illuminati, today. In fact, it has once again been twisted and turned in order to deviate people from truth, or from ever knowing the truth about what people thought was true, and what may be true, and what may not be true, to something that promotes, again, a political agenda. The political agenda is socialism. It is communism. It is trying to take us back the way that the world should never go. And the end result, of course, would be total control and manipulation of every single human being on the face of this earth, from birth to grave, every single moment of their lives. But you see, even though the ancient pagan religions and the ancient mystery teachings may not be true, there is always the possibility that some of those teachings may be true. And there is also the possibility that most of the modern great religions and churches may be just perversions of that ancient mystery religion. In fact, I can guarantee you that many of them absolutely are, and it can be proven without a doubt for those who wish to study the subject. Religion, from the very beginning of man, has been a method for a few to control many. Now, I'm not telling you that you should or should not believe in any religion. If you know me, folks, you know that I believe in freedom. I believe in freedom of choice. I believe in freedom to worship whatever you want to worship, even if it's a rock on the side of the road. I don't care, as long as you don't hurt the person or property of any other human being. I would hope that along the way you would hear me or someone else who is imparting truth or trying to impart truth, because truth is sometimes elusive at best. And sometimes, even when we believe that we have the truth, sometimes we again have been misled. We've all been through that many times. And me probably more than most, because I have been on a quest for the truth for so many years that I don't even remember when I started, ladies and gentlemen. And it is amazing where that quest will take you. Most of you have been busy, embroiled in everyday life, embroiled in entertainment, in satisfying your senses, in falling in love and procreating and making a family and getting a job and making sure that you have enough money to feed that family and house that family. And you've been taught by many different people, starting with your parents, that's all that life is really all about, and that you really weren't capable of doing much more than that anyway. And somehow you believed it along the way. And so you got stuck in that. And so you may not have have been searching as long or as hard as I have, you may not have been down some of the alleys and dead-end streets and almost fallen off of some of the cliffs that I have almost fallen off of, and on occasion actually fallen off of, only to always come back to the straight and narrow path. And so it would behoove you to listen with an open mind and try to learn something from this. For I'm not trying to tell you that what you're going to hear is right. On the contrary, I'm going to try to tell you that this is what it is, and many people believe it, or a perversion of it. And it is what guides them in their agendas. It is their religion. Whether or not they will admit it publicly, it is their religion. And that can also be documented in their own words. So, I think I'm going to start in the middle of this. I'm not going to tell you what it is. And that's a deviation from normally what I do. But as I said, folks, I'm not supposed to have this. And this is not something that is let out of the clutches of the brotherhood too often or willingly. And so I must be very careful with how I handle this and how I impart it, and how much about its true nature and its source and origin as I can possibly be. And so I will. So I'm not going to ask you to trust me that this is true. You know my admonition. Listen to everyone, read everything, believe absolutely nothing or anyone unless you can prove it in your own research. That is an absolute necessity in this age of deception. And folks, it is, without any doubt, the greatest age of deception that has ever existed on the face of this earth. Because I can tell you, quite frankly, that from the very beginning, when one man learned that he could control other men by deceiving them, deception has been rampant in this world. And if you ever thought that you lived in a world where everybody around you was honest and telling you the truth, and these people that you have in government are always telling you the truth, then you haven't grown up yet. You're still living as a child. And that's got to change very quickly. If you want to survive this great battle that is raging, ladies and gentlemen, and the great battle is raging. It's a war, as a matter of fact. And it is a quiet war, which mostly uses silent weapons, but nevertheless, it is a war. And there are casualties. And there is violence in this war. And people are destroyed. Whole families and populations are destroyed. And so, without further ado, we will get into the meat of the matter after this short intermission, which will sort of lay a little groundwork here.
Why am I changing? Why do people get complacent with the things they're told? Well, disasters, they come and go. I give anything just to be back home. 'Cause there are people asking why. There are people who believe in life. It's confusing, but I don't know why. But I've made my plans already. How do I get to where I've come from now? How will I face this God that I've destroyed? Can I get back to where
Now, ladies and gentlemen, during this narrative, remember that I am reading from an esoteric revelatory book that it can only be found in the hidden libraries of the fraternal orders around the world, the secret societies which at the very top hide the full body of adepts known as the Illuminati. So pay very close attention, and you're going to learn an awful lot about what makes them tick over the next few broadcasts, and why they do and believe some of the things that they do and believe, and why they hate you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, if you want to talk about hate crimes, these people are up to their ears in hate crimes. I begin. Little could the ancient mythologists and sages have foreseen that the fabulous narrations which their genius devised to cloak high truth would end by plaguing the mind of the Western world with 16 centuries of unconscionable stultification. They could not possibly imagine that their allegorical constructions to dramatize spiritual truth would so miscarry from their hidden intent as to cast the mental life of half the world for ages under the cloud of the most grotesque superstition known to history. Nor could they have dreamed that the gross blindness and obtuseness of later epochs would cite these same marvelously ingenious portrayals as the evidence of childish crudity on the part of their formulators. Who could have suspected that a body of the most signal instrumentalities for conveying and preserving deep knowledge ever devised by man would become the means of centuries of mental enslavement? Nothing more clearly evidences the present age's loss of fixed moorings in philosophical truth than the inconsistency of its attitudes toward the sacred scriptures of antiquity. The general mind, indoctrinated by priestcraft, regards them as infallible revelations and holds them as fetishes, which it were a sacrilege to challenge, while theological scholarship hedges from pious veneration of them over to outright skepticism of their divine origin, swinging more recently to a view which takes them to be the simple conceptions of men just emerging from cave and forest barbarism. The character of divine dictation and absolute wisdom assigned to them on the one thesis has yielded to that of ignorant speculation of primitive folk on the other. That there is a possible truer characterization of them lying midway between the extravagances of these two extreme views has not seemed to come through to intelligence at any time. It has not occurred to students of religion that ancient scripts are the work neither of supreme deity on the one side, nor of groping infantile humanity on the other, but that their production must be sought in a region intermediate between the two. They came neither from supernal deity nor from common humanity, but from humanity divinized. They were the output of normal humans, graduated to divine or near divine status. St. Paul's, quote, just men made perfect, end quote. Their divinity is therefore not transcendent and exotic, and their humanity is not crude and doltish. They bear the marks, therefore, of human sagacity exalted to divine mastership. When a student graduates creditably from a college, he is presumed to have acquired a mastery over the field of knowledge covered in his course. Human life is a school, and why should not its graduates be presumed to have gained mastery over the range of knowledge which it covers, and to be able to write authoritatively upon it? Humans must at some time attain the goal, the prize of the high calling of God in Christly illumination, the crown of glorious intelligence. Life's school issues no diploma of graduation without attainment, for the graduation is the attainment. We have here the ground for the only sane acceptance of the ancient scriptures as books of accredited wisdom. We are neither asked to believe them inscribed by the finger of omnipotent deity, nor forced to attribute them to the undeveloped brains of primitives. They can be seen as the products of the sage wisdom garnered by generations of men who had finally risen to clear understanding. They are the literary heritage bequeathed by men grown to the stature of divinity. Their veneration by the world for long centuries, even carried to the extreme of outrageous sycophancy, attests an indestructible tradition of their origination from sources accredited as divine and infallible. Their successful hold on the popular mind for many ages bespeaks also the unshakable foundations of their wisdom. They have withstood consistently the test of generations of human experience. Their wisdom holds against life. It reigns true, and it is all the more precious to us because of its authorship by men of our own evolution, since thereby it does not miss immediate pertinence to our life. Both the conventional views of Bible authorship have militated against the possible high service of the Scriptures to mankind. The theory of their divine dictation to holy men of old has led to the abject surrender of the rational mind before their impregnable fortress of direct assertion, its hypnotization by a fetish, and the crippling of its native energies. The theory of their production by early crudity tends to the disparagement of the value and validity of their message. The other view here advanced preserves their venerated authority while it brings their authorship from alleged cosmic divinity back to men of earth. It saves us from the fatuous claim that God took time out to dictate a volume of absolute verity for the inhabitants of a minor planet amongst millions of trillions of such worlds. Relieving us of the necessity of asserting that supreme deity went into the book publishing business on this globe and took advantage of his commanding position to write the planet's bestseller, it preserves mental integrity by enabling us to assign scriptural authorship to human agency, where it alone is acceptable. It is understandable that evolved men with vision opened to knowledge of the laws of life would indite sage tomes for the enlightenment of those less advanced. In any case, the Bibles are here. They must be accounted for. The phenomenon of their existence among the nations, their hoary age, their escape from destruction through the centuries, the ineradicable tradition of their divine origin and authority, their almost universal veneration, must all find some factual ground of explanation. The theory offered in refutation of the two conventional ones seems the only one that provides such a rational and acceptable basis. And since the belief in their sacredness generally persists, it cannot be regarded as less than momentous that the world should know of a surety that, while these revered relics are not the voice of the personified cosmos, neither are they the mere speculative romancing of cavemen or scholastics. They are the sure word of perfected wisdom. There was a time, then, in early human history, when enlightened men possessed true knowledge, the passport to wisdom. Clear and concise answers to the profoundest problems of philosophy were known. Insofar as the human intellectual faculty is capable of it, an understanding of the mystery and riddle of life itself and the laws of its evolutionary unfolding was achieved by men who, as Hermes says, had been, quote, reborn in mind, end quote. Philosophy was no more, quote, speculative enterprise, end quote, or tilting at logical windmills. It was a statement of the fundamental archai, or basic principles of the science of being. It formed the groundwork for the elevation of theology to its true place as the king of sciences, or the kingly science. Together, philosophy and theology held the throne in the mental life of mankind, and justly so, for a reason which modern thought would do well to consider. They must ever be the ultimate science because they motivate finally the use we make of all other sciences. They hold final answers to all life's problems. They are the determiners of all human action in the end. They alone can direct man finally to the path of good, or by no other means can he learn to know what constitutes the good. The sore need of the world today is the restoration of philosophy to supply the proper motivation and end of action. Though zealously guarded from the unworthy by its accredited custodians, knowledge was extant in the ancient day. Modern zeal for publicity finds it hard to understand why it was so sedulously kept esoteric. Briefly, for the full reason is a lengthy matter, a thing so precious, the distillation of ages of experience and the deposit of many lives of painful earning, could not be given out loosely to the undisciplined rabble to be violated and despoiled. Yet it was withheld from no worthy aspirant. No bars of bigotry or persecution interdicted its free culture. The societies in which it was secretly pursued were honored by kings and the populace alike. That halcyon age passed. That priceless legacy of knowledge was threatened with extinction. Its pursuit was forbidden, its devotees assailed and exterminated. And for more than 15 centuries, the Occidental world has muddled through its age-to-age existence in nearly total ignorance of the fact that antiquity held in its philosophy and theology an adequate answer to the great interrogatory, the Sphinx riddle of human life. And as an aside here, folks, I have discussed the riddle of the Sphinx on past broadcasts, and I have told you the truth about what the Sphinx represents. And those of you who are quick and understood the symbology will make that connection again here. I continue. The gift and then the loss of primal wisdom are the two most momentous events in human history. This age will be spectator to the third most significant event, the renaissance of ancient culture. The plans of demigods and divine men, interrupted for 15 centuries of the Dark Ages, will move forward again toward destined goals, the completion of the great work. This age faces the denouement of a drama the like of which has not been unrolled in world history before and will hardly be repeated in aeons. Tragedy and comedy being copiously admixed in mortal existence, the astounding spectacle to which the world will shortly awake will exhibit untold calamity and the ludicrous conjoined in incredible fashion. We are destined soon to pass from a stunning sense of tragic loss to a world-echoing burst of laughter. The sting of our realization of our duo-millennial loss will melt away under the dawning recognition of our previous unbelievable stupidity. We are in a little time to be made acutely aware of a situation that will become the butt of hollow mirth for ages to come. Other egregious follies of history can be accepted or extenuated to the point of being condoned and forgotten. But this colossal ineptitude, prolonged over 16 centuries, cannot escape being laughed at for centuries more. A joke owes its character to the miscarriage of the intended sense into something ludicrously different. This denouement will stand as the historical joke of the ages. No less than this quantity of hilarity can balance the weight of the tragedy which loads the joke at the other end. For the ludicrously different direction in which the intended sense of the great mythical religions and dramatic rituals of the past took its perverted course entailed as a consequence the greatest of all historical led out of the miscarriage of the concealed meaning of the ancient spiritual myth. The transaction carried the form of a joke, but it also carried the substance of the most appalling terrorism in history. And this most calamitous of all blunders was the mistaking of religious myth, drama, and allegory for veridical history. The promise of our coming awakening. The promise of our coming awakening lies in the progress made and to be made in the study of comparative religion, comparative mythology, and comparative philology. What they will ere long make clear to us beyond further dispute is the most unthinkable fact that for 16 centuries the best intelligence of the West took the ancient sages' books of wisdom, which were in all cases the spiritual dramatizations of the experience of the human soul on earth, for objective historical narratives. The spectacle that will soon throw a world first into wonder, confusion, and dismay, and then into clownish laughter, is that of a civilization covering 1/3 of the globe, and boasting itself as the highest in culture in the historical period, all the while taking its moral and spiritual guidance for an aeon from a book or books of the true content and meaning of which it never for one moment has had the slightest inkling.
There used to be a great tower alone on the sea. You became the light on the dark side of me. Love remains a drug that's high enough to kill. But did you know that when it snows, my eyes become large and the light that you shine can't be seen? I can bring you to a kiss from a rose on the grave. Ooh, the more I get of you, the stranger it feels, yeah. And now that your rose is in bloom, I like it, the bloom on the grave. To me, I like a grown-up fiction that I can't deny. Now won't you tell me, is that happy, baby? But did you know that when it snows, my eyes become large and the light that you shine can't be seen?
You're listening to the Hour of the Time. I'm William Cooper, and I'm reading to you from a jealously guarded, esoteric tome that comes right out of the heart of the mysteries. This is, ladies and gentlemen, what you're hearing and what you will hear over the next several broadcasts, the heart and soul of the truth of the mystery religions that gave birth to socialism, communism, humanism, and is at war, totally and completely at war with all the other religions of the earth. Their goal is to completely destroy all existing nation-states, all existing churches and religions, and to shackle the mob in a system of world totalitarian socialist government. And so you had better listen to this. The superior knowledge vouchsafed from early graduates in life school to disciplined pupils in the mysteries of old was transmitted from generation to generation by oral teaching and preserved only in memory. But later, lest it be lost or corrupted, it was consigned to writing. Hence came the sacred books of Scriptures, holy writ of antiquity. So highly were they held in the esteem of early men that when in later days their true origin and character had been forgotten, they were exalted to the position of veritable fetishes and assigned a quite preternatural source and rating. Regarded as books of superhuman intelligence, men have in face of them practically set in abeyance their human reason and bowed to them as the oracles of absolute truth. This was natural and to a degree inevitable, but it spelled catastrophe to the general mental life of man by fixing upon him the basest hypnotization in all the annals of record, when a literal and historical instead of a purely spiritual and typical interpretation of the books was broadcast to general acceptance. The evidence is mountain high that the taking of ancient ritual dramas and scriptural myths for objective history and the figures in them for human persons has been the fountain source of the most abject corruption of man's mental forces since the race began. In mechanical exploit, this is an age of marvel, and credit for this type of achievement should not be withheld. In study of life and its objective powers, it has labored with wondrous accomplishment. In psychological delving into deeper phases of consciousness, it has begun a pursuit long neglected. But in religion and philosophy, it is one of the blindest of ages. It is not overstating the case to say that in these areas of human enterprise, the mind of this era still slumbers in a state of ineptitude and gross darkness, at least a degree or two below that commonly termed barbaric. At this moment, the common mentality of the day, led and fed by a compactly institutionalized ecclesiastical power, stands committed to ideas as to the origin, structure, meaning, and destiny of life, which have not been surpassed in crudity and chimerical absurdity by the tribes of the forest and the sea isles. Conceptions in theology, having to do with basic realities of man's relation to the universe, are still presented in pulpits, Sunday schools, and theological seminaries, which the uncorrupted native intelligence of children of 8 and 10 years shrinks from or accepts with startled dismay, to the subsequent confusion of their whole mental integrity. A scheme of explanation of cosmic processes and world design, of human and angelic relations, of the plan and purport of life itself, is advanced for popular acceptance, yet it is grotesque to common sense and fantastic to rational thought. Philosophy and religion are still propagated on the basis of a theology that is received without understanding by the common people, entirely repudiated by the intelligentsia, and brazenly dissembled by the very priesthood that lips its cantos and its oracles from Sunday to Sunday. In sum, it can be said without the remotest possibility of successful dispute that the general grasp of the mind of this age on philosophical verity and the truth of life, as proffered by orthodox religionism, is still steeped in the crassest forms of dark superstition, and this has been due to the miscarriage of ancient symbolism. History would seem to present a pattern of retrogressive current if it can be shown that this late epoch grovels in a mire of semi-barbaric philosophical grossness from which a former period was free. Degeneracy must have set in at some distant time and swept onward to this day, and such a phenomenon must have had its due cause. A great work of a learned author some years ago pointed to the approaching, quote, decline of the West, end quote. What has not been seen, however, is that the West has long been in decline, is at a low stage of decay, and has not risen out of the murks of the Dark Ages. This has come in the wake of causes long operative in the world situation, which have been overlooked or failed of discovery through an egregious obscuration of the vision of scholars since the early centuries. And if this failure of insight is not to be attributed to stupidity that is in itself beyond understanding, then it becomes necessary for the historian of these things to posit for it another cause, one that casts the dark shadow of sinister motive over the whole course of that historical enterprise in which sinister motive is of all places most unpardonable. Corruption in politics or in economic or social life can be understood in relation to the imperfection of human nature, and in a measure pardoned. But designed corruption in religion is shattering to the very foundations of human aspiration. It shocks and paralyzes fundamental urges to sincerity. It weights the human spirit with the hopelessness of its effort to conquer imperfection. Dishonesty and insincerity in worldly dealings may entail disaster of greater or minor degree. In religion, they are never less than fatal. There is one domain in which untruth is unsupportable, that field of the human soul's endeavor of which truth is the very substance and being: religion. Whether stupidity or sinister design prove to have been the cause of the loss of true original meaning must be left to the historical sequel to disclose. And whether the cause of the perpetuation of rank superstition in the present day of alleged enlightenment is to be laid at the door of ignorance or knavery, or a combination of both, must likewise be determined as time moves on. It is certain that both the primal and the present causes of nescience are kindred, if not identical. It is the purpose of the present volume to set forth to the modern mind the extent of the wreckage which splendid ancient wisdom suffered at the hands of later incompetence. And it is designed to accomplish this by setting up the sharp contrast between the present disfigurement and the past glory of the structure. This purpose entails the task of revealing for the first time the hidden meaning of the body of archaic scriptures by means of a clear and lucid interpretation of their myths and allegories, fables and dramas, astrological pictographs, and numerological outlines. It will be at once seen to be a labor of no mean proportions to convert the entire mass of antique mythology and legend, biblical glyph and cryptogram, from presumed childish nonsense into an organic corpus of transcendent scientific significance. It involves the reversal of that mental process which in the days of early Christianity operated to change myth and allegory in the first instance over to factual history. As 3rd century ignorance converted mythical typology to objective history, the task is now to convert alleged objective history back to mythology, and then to interpret it as enlightened theology. The almost insuperable difficulty of the project will consist in demonstrating to an uncomprehending world, mistaught for centuries and now fixed in weird forms of fantastic belief, that the sacred scriptures of the world are 1,000 times more precious as myths than as alleged history. It can only be done by showing that as myths they illumine and exalt the mind to unparalleled clarity, while as assumed history they are either nonsensical or inconsequential. But centuries of erroneous indoctrination have so warped and victimized the modern mind that the effort to restore the scriptures to their primal mythical status will be met with the objection that the transaction will wipe the Bible and other sacred literature out of the realm of value altogether. In the common mind, this would be to rob them of worth and significance utterly. So wretchedly has the ancient usage of the religious myth been misunderstood that the cry, quote, "the Bible only a myth," end quote, will fall upon the popular ear with all the catastrophic force and finality of the tolling of a death knell, and no statement that words can phrase will stand as a more redoubtable testimony to the correctness of this estimate of the present stupefaction of modern intelligence concerning religious philosophy than just this reaction. Ridicule, contempt, and flat rejection will be the greeting accorded the proclamation that biblical myth is truer and more important than biblical history. Our book aims at nothing less than the full proof of this contention. It flies directly in the face of the awaiting scorn of common opinion on the point at issue. Yet nothing is easier than to demonstrate that Bible material taken as history is the veriest nonsense. Anyone with an analytic mind and an imagination to convert its narratives into realism can make it a laughingstock. The Voltaires, Paines, Ingersolls, and the freethinkers have done this successfully enough. But having disproved it as history, they have not redeemed it as spiritual mythology. The world awaits this work of interpretation, and only when it is supplied will the full force of the tragic humor of mistaking drama for history be grasped. The loss or corruption of the philosophical interpretation of ancient scriptures precipitated the West into the Dark Ages, and a main factor in this disaster was a general obscuration of intelligence concerning the myth. Catastrophe was made the more readily possible because the rationale of the use of the myth in ancient hands passed from knowledge. When the recondite suggestiveness of the myth was lost, the inner essence of esoteric wisdom was dissipated away. Philosophy died out, and, bereft of its inner soul, the myth came to stand as the mere ghost of itself. With its hidden significance gone, it read nonsense and caricature, and so it has stood till this day. The word connotes in the popular mind of the present something about equivalent to fairy tale, a fiction little removed from a hoax. It is something that is sheer fanciful invention. To declare a narrative formerly believed to be true only a myth is to toss it out on the rubbish heap as a thing no longer of value. And this attitude of mind toward the myth is itself the sign and seal of the decadence of this age, and truly the mark of the beast. For ancient sagacity could hardly have assumed that any succeeding age would prove so obtuse as to take the outward form of its spiritual allegories for factual occurrence, or suppose that their formulators believed them to be true objectively. To be sure, they are fanciful creations, and entirely fictitious. They are fables of events which as events never happened. The aim was never at any time to deceive anybody. It was never imagined that anybody would ever believe them. Nevertheless, the myth was designed to tell truth of the last importance. Its instrument was fancy, but its purpose was not falsehood, but sublime truth. Outwardly, it was not true, but at the same time, it portrayed full truth. It was not true for its characters, but was true for all mankind. It was only a myth, but it was a myth of something. It used a false story to relate a true one, and thus maintain the secret doctrine within the brotherhood, while those who read it, who were not initiates, never saw the truth of the myth. While it never happened, it is the type of all things that have happened and will happen. It is not objective history, but it embalms the import and substance, the heart's core of all human history. Such authors as Spengler and Lord Raglan have begun to see that the ancients regarded it of far less importance to catalog the occurrences of objective history than to dramatize its inner spirit. The outward actions of humans are in the main trivial. because they constitute in the end only a partial and ephemeral account of the whole verity. Ancient literature aimed at something infinitely higher and more universal. It strove to depict in the myths and dramas the eternal norms of life experience, which would stand as truth for all men at any time in evolution. The myths were cryptographs of the great design and pattern of human history, limning in the large the truth that is only in fragmentary fashion brought to living enactment in any given set of historical circumstances. The myth is always truer than history. Only in aeons will history have caught up with the myth, when it will have unfolded the entire design of the original mythograph. Hegel indeed essayed to read the features of a grand cosmic design in the straggling line of actual events, but the myth already foreshadows the ultimate meaning of history. Now, such being the portentous function of the myth in the early stages of the life of humanity, it becomes in some degree apparent what blindness must have fallen upon the mental eye of practically a whole world to have blotted out in little more than a single century the knowledge of a thing of such vast utility. No matter how conclusively the data may prove the fact, it will probably remain forever incomprehensible to unstudied folk that whole bodies of ancient mythology and spiritual typology suddenly became metamorphosed into alleged history. It is incredible enough in all conscience. It has been the supreme tragedy of history, and because it ensued through sheer gaucherie and clumsy, loutish dumbness, it will, as predicted, rise on our horizon as the supreme folly of the ages, when it is realized that an early gift of divine wisdom, planned to aid the race fight through the exigencies of its historical evolution, totally miscarried into tragic nonsense through the simple mistake of taking spiritual allegory for literal history, a humiliated world will find difficulty in ridding its memory of this preposterous blunder. And that's as far as we can go tonight, folks, because we're just about out of time. We will continue tomorrow at the same time, 8 Pacific, 11 Eastern. And of course, this broadcast tonight will rerun tomorrow at 3 Pacific, 6 Eastern, and it will not be on shortwave. Good night, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that you learned a little bit tonight, and that you will continue to learn from this in future broadcasts, and that you are taking in the spirit that it is intended to educate you as to what the secret doctrine really is. You see, Blavatsky is one of the propagandists, one of the deceivers, one of the manipulators. She didn't even come close. But you have to understand what Blavatsky wrote in order to understand secular humanism. Good night, and God bless each and every single one of you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening once again to the Hour of the Time, the only hour that ever was or that ever will be. This is the most important hour in your life. For during this hour, you will decide your future, and thus our collective futures. Tonight, once again, we will delve into the lost light, the lost word, as it's called, the great plan, the great work, the actual dogma, if you will, the actual true religion of the mysteries, the fraternal orders, the secret societies, which at the pinnacle of their pyramidal process of initiation lie the true and complete body of adepts, those known as the philosophers of fire, the Illumined Ones, or Illuminati. In the works that I will quote from, you will hear reference to the Illuminati from time to time. And when they mention the Illuminati, they are talking about their brothers or their superiors, the body of wise men whom are working behind the veil, behind the scenes, if you will, the 1,000 points of light, to bring about a utopian socialist world order. I would advise you not to believe anything that you hear on this broadcast, or any other broadcast for that matter, but to listen to everyone, read everything, believe absolutely nothing unless you can prove it in your own research. I also advise you to have pen and paper by your side, ladies and gentlemen, so you can take notes copiously if you expect to retain and understand, ultimately, any of what you are going to hear this evening. And for those of you who may have an inkling based upon your past study of our Mystery Babylon broadcasts, you will find great treasure. And I don't mean the kind of treasure that will cause you to switch religions or cause some dawning of some great truth to manifest itself in your mind, but will cause you a tremendous leap in understanding about where we are and where we're going, who is at the helm, and why they hate. And when I say hate, ladies and gentlemen, I am not mincing words. Why they hate you with a passion. I remind the listeners to this broadcast that this is not a religious broadcast. It is an illumination. A great man once said, "Seek ye the truth, and the truth will make you free." And so, with this series, I bring you the truth of a great secret in the world, at work constantly all the time. Only you, the profane, not understanding the language of this hidden work, this hidden manipulation, this great plan, stumble blindly through the forest, bouncing off of the trees. You don't know where you're going, you don't know where you came from, and you have no idea why you are where you are at. The Western world has too long and fatuously labored under the delusion that a pious and devout disposition fulfills the whole requirement of true religion. Now, this is the belief of those who belong to the mystery religion of ancient Babylon, and that's exactly where this comes from. And you must understand that I am quoting from esoteric works that you will not find in your local library, and I will be quoting from several of those works tonight. Ancient sagacity knew that piety without intelligence, or religion without philosophy, was insufficient and dangerous. It knew that general good intent was not safe from aberrancy, folly, and fanaticism, unless it was directed by the highest powers and resources of the mind. And the mind itself had to be fortified with specific knowledge of the nature of the cosmos and of man, and the relation between the two. Following the dictum of the sage Hermes Trismegistus, that, quote, "the vice of a soul is ignorance, the virtue of a soul is knowledge," end quote, the scriptures of old inculcated the precept that with all man's getting, he must first get wisdom and understanding. These were related to his well-being as health to his navel and marrow to his bones, and would alone give him a crown of eternal life. They were pronounced more precious than all the things that he could desire. The Council of Illuminati therefore laid down their system of cosmology and anthropology, which have become by immemorial tradition the Bibles of humanity, universally reverenced. In them were given the ordinances of life, the constitution of the cosmos, the laws governing both nature and mind. They still constitute the Magna Carta of all human action guided by intelligence, for they were the first institutes embodying the principia and fundamenta of all moral behavior, the only true chart and compass to guide human effort in a line of harmony with an overshadowing divine plan of evolution for the cosmos. The corruption and final loss of the basic meaning of these scriptures has been, in the whole of time, the greatest tragedy in human history. Like Shakespeare's tide, which, taken at the flood, leads on to fortune, but omitted, casts all the rest of life in shoals and quicksands, the wreckage of the esoteric gnosis in the centuries following Plato's day, culminating in the debacle of all philosophical religion about the 3rd century of Christianity's development and ushering in 16 centuries of the Dark Ages, has thrown all religion out of basic relation to true understanding and caused it to breed an endless train of evils, fanaticisms, bigotries, idiosyncrasies, superstitions, wars, and persecutions that more than anything else blacken the record of man's historic struggle toward the light. The present, most frightful of all historical barbarities, owes its incidence directly to the decay of ancient philosophical knowledge and the loss of vision and virtue that would have attended its perpetuation. What, then, must be the importance of a book which restores to the scriptures of ancient wisdom the lost light of their true original meaning? Well, in a very real and direct way, the salvation of culture and a free spirit in the world is contingent upon this restoration of the ancient intelligence to modernity. For man at this age has had new and mighty powers of nature suddenly placed in his hands, and yet lacks the spiritual poise and sagacity to use them without calamity. Most strangely, the control of the lower physical, natural, or brute forces by the mind or reason was the one central situation primarily and fundamentally dealt with in the sage tomes of antiquity. To effect that control in a perfect balance and harmony, and to train the reasoning intellect in the divine art of it, was the aim and end of the arcane philosophy. Ideology in the Western world has endlessly vacillated back and forth between the cult of the inner spirit and engrossment in objective materialism. Ancient philosophy taught that the true path of evolutionary growth was to be trodden by an effort that united the forces of the spirit with those of the world, the lower disciplined by the higher. The whole gist of the esoteric doctrine was the study and mastery of the powers engaged in working out the evolutionary advance so that the aspirant might be able to align his cultural effort in consonance with the requirements of the problem and the end to be achieved. Now, without this guiding data and this evolutionary perspective, modern man is totally at a loss how to focus his endeavor and is unable to point his direction in line with anything more fixed and basic than his next immediate objective of apparent desirability. He has neither a knowledge of his origin, a chart of his path, an inventory of his capacities, or a vision of his goal. Hence, he travels the long road, still a benighted wanderer without compass. He can but recoil from one mistaken plunge after another, learning sporadic lessons from pain and misfortune. The ancient torch that was lighted for his guidance he has let burn out. This lamp was the body of ancient philosophy. In this critical epoch in the life of the world, This broadcast proclaims afresh the message of lost truth according to the adepts, the Illuminati, of the secret doctrine of the mystery religion of ancient Babylon. Now, don't mistake what you hear on this broadcast for what I believe, ladies and gentlemen. That is not the purpose of the broadcast, and I can assure you that most of this, other than the fact that it is the truth of what the worshipers of this religion believe, I do not believe at all, I can assure you. Three ancient and long discredited sciences have had a surprising renaissance in popular fancy and scientific interest. You have heard it from me many times. One is symbolism, one is alchemy, another is astrology. The last has particularly come into a general vogue, but on a basis which still inclines conservative positivism in science and scholarship to regard it as allied closely with popular superstition. In its predictive or fortune-telling aspect, it is generally looked at askance. But there is another side on which it has pertinence and value that has not been recognized in the modern revival, and on which perhaps its most legitimate claim to consideration may rest. This is its function as symbolic theology. And in that manner, ladies and gentlemen, you can take it to the bank, but only if you understand the symbology. Unquestionably, according to the great adepts, cosmic operation, cosmic significance lie behind the 12 constellations of the zodiac and the 36 or more other stellar configurations. The planisphere, or chart of the heavens, was doubtless the very first of all Bibles, pictorially edited, not quite simply and directly, but intrinsically. All Bibles are amplifications and elaborations of the original volume of ideography, first written on the open face of the sky, charted in the zodiac and heavenly maps, and later transferred to earth and written in scrolls and parchments. It came about when man could not write, when man wished to express his feelings about life, about spirituality, about his origins, about the truths of life as he understood it, about his basic philosophy. And so, not being able to put it down on paper or to etch it in stone in those early times, he outlined it in the heavens using the stars that floated above him, rising in the east and setting in the west, night after night after night, eon after eon, thousands of years, passed down by word of mouth, and then one day, etched in stone, transferred to paper, and then finally printed in a book. Man was instructed to fashion his new body of spiritual glory after the pattern of things in the heavens, the heavenly or zodiacal man, and a graph of the structure and history of this celestial personage was sketched by the enlightened sages in the configurated star clusters. Zodiac, you see, comes from the Greek word zodion, a small living image, signifying that it is a graph of the microcosmic life of man, which is cast in the form of the macrocosmic life of the universe, or, to put it in a manner that you may understand more readily, or of God. Man's own small body is a replica of this body of God, made in its image and likeness. And isn't that what the Bible tells us? The vast frame of cosmic man was outlined in the scroll of the heavens, the solar systems and galaxies being living cell clusters in his immense organism. A great deal of this adumbrative symbology, elucidating theological doctrinism, is set forth in the body of the series of broadcasts which will be presented to you over the coming nights and weeks, and it will take weeks. But there is a group of its data that strikes so deeply into the heart of general theology that it is given tonight, during this broadcast, right at the outset, for the sake of its overwhelming impressiveness. And it will also help you to understand all that follows. It must prove to be so conclusive an evidence that biblical theology rests more solidly than has ever been believed on zodiacal backgrounds, that its presentation will be admittedly a matter of great moment for those who can grasp it. It traces the unsuspected significance of 2 of the 12 signs, Virgo and Pisces, in the very heart of New Testament narrative. Now let the reader picture before him the ordinary zodiac with the house of Virgo at the western equinox point and that of Pisces directly opposite on the eastern side. The simple fact that they stand 6 months apart will presently be seen to assume great importance in gospel determination. This exposition, ladies and gentlemen, must begin with the puzzling and hitherto unexplained item of ancient religious myth that the Christs, the Son, spelled S-U-N, gods, the Messiahs, all were depicted as having 2 mothers. Now how, you ask, could there possibly be rational significance in this? Well, it has been put aside as just some more of the mythical rubbish and nonsense of early paganism. You see, the profundity of pagan intelligence, hiding sublime cosmic truth under glyph and symbol, has not been dreamed of by the vast majority, and I mean majority down to almost the nth degree, of all of the people who have ever lived who have not been indoctrinated into this religion through the pyramidal system of initiation. The depiction should not have created incredulity, seeing that the gospel Jesus himself, dramatic figure of the divine principle in man, announced it categorically in declaring to Nicodemus that, quote, "Ye must be born again," end quote. Born again signifies 2 births. 2 births means 2 mothers. Nicodemus asks if this means that we must enter a second time into our mother's body and experience a second birth in the natural manner. Jesus replies that we, quote, "must be born of water and the Spirit," end quote. Attention, ladies and gentlemen, must be directed a moment to the fact that the Latin word spiritus, translated spirit in many passages, means as well air or breath. One of the great keys to Bible meaning is the series of the 4 elements of ancient mythicism: earth, water, air, and fire. The body of the physical, or natural man, was conceived as being composed of the 2 lower, earth and water, while air and fire, representing mind and spirit, commingled to make the higher or spiritual man. Jesus' statement to Nicodemus, then, could have been rendered born of water and air, and John the Baptist uses 3 of the 4 elements when he states that he, the forerunner of the Christos, and therefore a type of the lower natural man, indeed baptizes us with water, omitting earth, but that there cometh after him one higher than himself, who shall baptize us with the Holy Spiritus, air, and with fire. Jesus thus affirms that we have two births, necessitating two mothers, and John the Baptist adds that we must have two baptisms. Since man's spirit is an indestructible fragment of God's own mighty spirit, truly a tiny spark of that cosmic intelligence and love, which we call the mind of God, the ancients typified the divine element in man by fire, and in contrast, the lower or human element by water. The fiery soul of man, according to the adepts, is housed in a tenement of flesh and matter, which is 7/8 water by actual composition. The crossing of rivers and seas, and the immersion of solar heroes in water in olden mythologies, and the rite of baptism in theology, signified nothing beyond the fact of the soul's immersion in a physical body of watery nature in its successive incarnations. One of the prime tenets of the mystery schools is reincarnation. Now, once you understand thus far, now man is distinctly a creature compounded of two natures, a higher and a lower, a spiritual and a sensual, a divine and a human, a mortal and an immortal, and finally a fiery and a watery, conjoined in a mutual relationship in the organic body of flesh. Says Heraclitus, man is a portion of cosmic fire, imprisoned in a body of earth and water. Speaking of man, Plato affirms, through body it is an animal, through intellect it is a god. To create man, God incarnated the fiery spiritual principle of his life in the watery confines of material bodies. That is the truest basic description of man that anthropology can present. All problems spring from that foundation and are referable for solution back to it. And in past programs, we talked about this principle in the attempt to cast the molten sea. So man is then a natural man and a god in combination, according to this mystery religion. Our natural body gives the soul of man its baptism by water. Our nascent spiritual body is to give us the later baptism by fire. We are born first as the natural man, then as the spiritual, or we are born first by water and then by fire. Of vital significance at this point are two statements by St. Paul. Quote, "That was not the first which is spiritual, but that which is natural. And first that which is natural, then that which is spiritual," end quote. And again he says, quote, "For the natural man comprehendeth not the things of the Spirit of God, neither can he," end quote. Of course not. For he is not yet in that higher kingdom of evolution, and he must be transformed, transfigured, lifted up into a superior world of consciousness before he can cognize spiritual things. And evolution, they believe, will thus transform him, and nothing else will. So using astrological bases for portraying cosmic truths according to the adepts, the ancients localized the birth of the natural man in the zodiacal house of Virgo, and that of the spiritual man in the opposite house of Pisces. These then were the houses of the two mothers of life. The first was the Virgin Mother, Virgo, the primeval symbol of the Virgin Mary, thousands of years B.C. I repeat, thousands of years B.C. Virgo gave man his natural birth by water and became known as the Water Mother. Pisces, on the other hand, the fishes by name, gave him his birth by the fish and was denominated the Fish Mother. The Virgin Mothers are all identified with water as symbol, and their various names, such as Mary, spelled M-E-R-I, Mary, spelled M-A-R-Y, Venus, V-E-N-U-S, which literally means born of the sea foam, Tiamat, Typhon, or Thala, all Greek for sea, are designations for water. On the other side, there are the fish avatars of Vishnu, such as the Babylonian Ionis, or Dagon, and the Assyrian goddess, Atargatis, was called the fish mother. Virgo stood as the mother of birth by water, or the birth of man, the first, of the earth, earthy. Pisces stood as the mother of birth by spirit, or fire, or the birth of man, the second, described by St. Paul as, quote, the Lord from heaven, end quote. Remember, I told you on many broadcasts ago that Paul was a member of the mystery schools. There's no doubt about it. Anyone who has studied the symbology and the teachings of the mysteries can read the life of Paul and the letters and see scattered all throughout this secret doctrine. Virgo was the water mother of the natural man, Pisces the fish mother of the spiritual man. So there must now be brought out an unreal proceeds in and from water. All first life originated in the seawater according to the theory of evolution, and these people are the ones who brought that about. The fish is a birth in and from the water, and it stands patiently, patently, as the generic type of organic life issuing out of inorganic. The fish typifies life embodied in a physical, organic structure. Organic life is born out of the water and is the first birth, child of the water mother. And if organic life is in turn to become mother, its child will be mind and spiritual consciousness, son of the fish mother. In brief, water is the mother of natural physical being, and organic structure becomes the later mother of divine mind. Now, strangely enough, water is the type of another thing, which is still more germinal of life, namely matter. You see, matter is the virgin mother of all life in the aboriginal Genesis. All things are generated in the womb of primordial matter, the old genetrix of Egyptian mythology, and it is by a consideration of the nature of matter and its evolution that we are enabled to arrive at last at the true meaning of the double motherhood of life. For oddly enough, matter is seen to exist in two states, in each of which it becomes mother of life at two different levels. According to the mysteries, primordial matter, the sea of, to us, empty space, is the first mother of all living forms. This is the primal abyss of the waters in Genesis. The Latin word for mother is our very word matter, with one T left out, spelled M-A-T-E-R. And how close to M-A-T-E-R is water? And organic structure is the second mother, parent of spiritual mind. The ancient books always grouped the two mothers in pairs. They were called the two mothers, or sometimes the two divine sisters, or they were the wife and sister of the god under the names of Juno, Isis, Ishtar, Sybil, or Mylitta. In Old Egypt, they were first Apt and Neith, and later Isis and Nephthys. Massey relates Neith to net, in effect, fishnet. Clues to their functions were picked up in the great Book of the Dead. Quote, Isis conceived him, Nephthys gave him birth, end quote. Or, quote, Isis bore him, Nephthys suckled him, end quote, or reared him. Now, the full sense of these statements was not discerned until they were scrutinized in the light of another key sentence which matched them. Quote, Heaven conceived him, the Tuat brought him forth, end quote. With this came the flash of clear insight into the mystery. For that which is to eventuate in the cycles of evolution as divine mind and an organic creature, man, is aboriginally conceived by divine ideation in the innermost depths of cosmic consciousness, or in the purely noumenal world, or again, in the bosom of infinite spirit, where spirit is identical with pure, undifferentiated matter. This is mirrored in the Egyptian statement that Isis conceived him. Matter, in its invisible, inorganic state, was the womb of the first conception. You see, Isis is a virgin, in effect pure matter, or matter sublimated to spiritual tenuity. The Tuat, on the other hand, is really earth, as the type of physical matter, or matter organic, aggregated into substantial forms called by us physical matter. It is matter as substance, constituted and existent in the visible world in structural forms. Isis was matter subsistent as empty space, and Nephthys was atomic matter constituent of visible structural forms. The physical worlds, which we must now think of as floating in the sea of empty space, like fish in the water, are the second form of matter, and their organic bodies of substantial matter give birth to the logoi in the solar systems and to the Christos in man. This is another one of their basic tenets, that there is a Christ in every man. So divine spirit is conceived in the womb of Isis, the first universal mother, and brought to birth in the womb of Nephthys, the second mother. The immediate incubator and gestator is manifest expression. Now, one might paraphrase this situation by saying that a human child is first conceived in the love or mind of its parents, and later born from the womb of its physical mother. Thus life has two births, and must of necessity have two mothers. Life is spiritually conceived and materially born. Or man may be said to be born as a natural creature from spirit into matter, and born later as a spiritual God when he emerges from his baptism in the water of the body and re-enters the bosom of his Father. Or finally, he is born first as man by water, and reborn later as God by fire. And the first birth was depicted as taking place on the western side of the zodiac, in the house or womb of the Virgin Mother, Virgo. Because in the west, the sun, universal symbol of spiritual fire, descended into organic matter in its setting, or incarnation. So man is born as natural man on the west, to be regenerated as spiritual man on the east after having traveled through the underworld. Spirit's descent on the west makes it man. Its resurrection on the east, like the summer sunrise, makes it deity again. It was a great misconception, ladies and gentlemen. This is from my own knowledge and scattered throughout this teaching is my own knowledge. It was a great mistake for those who discovered the Egyptian Book of the Dead to believe that it was about the dead. In fact, it is the map of the journey of the soul according to the ancient mystery religions. As the soul descended into matter, into water, it died. It suffered a death. It journeyed through the underworld, here on this earth, living in a human body in what they called Amenta, or hell. And then the soul was reborn again. First it was died in the body,
but the body was born a living human being. And then when the body died, the soul was reborn and ascended again to unite with God and get ready for another incarnation. And during each incarnation, the soul suffered 2 deaths and 2 births from 2 mothers, and gained experience and knowledge and wisdom through its life, usually signified by a 3-day period in Amenta or hell, which was and still is in the mysteries this earth. The soul could die in this process and not regain reunion with its Father or the whole, simply by allowing the base nature of the animal in man to take over and rule or conquer the soul. That is why in ancient times, if one wished to become more spiritual, one would voluntarily have himself, or do it himself, neuter. And this was normally only done with males. I don't know of any instances where females neutered themselves, but it was common practice for those who considered themselves to be of the spiritual realm to castrate themselves. And so, we take a little pause here so that I can have a drink of water. So just to recap a little, Spirit's descent on the west makes it man. Its resurrection on the east like the summer sunrise makes it deity again. You see, they believe that all things stem from the one thing which was all that there was in the beginning, and that even rocks and trees and dirt and water and meteorites and water faucets all have a spark of divinity within them, and that they all have a chance in the next life to rise above that stage of evolution or reincarnation, which is a form of evolution, into a higher form, and eventually, if they learn the proper lessons, will become a permanent part, residing always with God. At that point, they become an ascended master, and can, according to the Illuminati, come back down to this earth to help humanity in its evolution as gods. Literally, they believe, as gods. This is the death and resurrection of the God in all religions. It is incarnation and return to spirit. It is the descent of the Messiah into Egypt and his exodus back to Canaan. A further scrutiny, ladies and gentlemen, of such data brings to light links of connection with the Bible. You can't get away from it. It's there. The chief one is found in the symbol of bread in connection with both Virgo and Pisces. Pisces is the house of the fishes by name, but it is not commonly known that Virgo in astrological symbology was the house of bread. Now this is indicated by several items of ancient typology. Many centuries ago, in the precession of the equinoxes, the end of the year was marked by the position of the great dog star Sirius, mighty celestial symbol of the divinity in man. Precisely at midnight of December the 24th, it stood on the meridian line from the zenith to Egypt. At the same moment, there arose on the eastern horizon the constellation of the Virgin, bearing in her left arm the Christ child, symbol of the Christhood coming to function in man, and in her right hand the great star Spica, which is Latin, a head or spike of wheat, symbol of that same divinity coming as celestial food for man, food for the spirit. It must ever be remembered that the gospel Jesus told us we had virtually to eat his body as food and drink his blood if we would inherit eternal life. So typism represented him as coming in the form of man, the babe Christ, and as food for man, the wheat. John speaks of the Christ principle in the words, quote, "This is that bread which came down from heaven, that if a man eat of it, he shall hunger no more," end quote. Check it out. Jesus broke a loaf into fragments and gave to his disciples, saying that it was his body broken for them. So we now have Virgo established as the house of bread and Pisces as the house of fish. But the characterization of the two houses must be brought along to a more specific evolutionary reverence. And, of course, you must have it as a positive reference. What are these houses thus delineated? They are, as at first, the two states of matter, but now to be taken in immediate reference to the life of man on earth. They are in the final stage of the meaning man's body itself, which consists of matter in both its invisible and its visible forms. For man has a natural body and a spiritual body. Man's body itself houses the two mothers. The body is this double house of bread and of fish. And the next link is seen when it is considered that this physical body is for the soul the house of death, and in its regenerative phase, the house of rebirth. It is the house into which the spirit descends to its partial obscuration in the darkness of the grave of matter, into the night of death, or incarnation, out of which it is to arise in a new birth or resurrection on the opposite side of the cycle. A significant passage from the Book of the Dead recites, quote, "Who cometh forth from the dusk, and whose birth is in the house of death," end quote, referring to the incarnating soul. In a spiritual sense, the soul dies on entering the body in incarnation, but has a new birth in it as it later resurrects from it. The body is therefore the house of his death and rebirth, or the place of his crucifixion and resurrection. It is the coffin. And in the initiatory rites of the secret fraternal orders, the initiate lies down in a coffin and suffers a symbolic death. He is then raised with the grip of the lion's paw, given a new name and a new life. The body is therefore the house of his death and rebirth, or the place of his crucifixion and resurrection. And the Egyptians had a name for the body as the locus of these transformations, which carry the central meaning of all theologies. This name now rises out of the dim mists of ancient Egyptian books to enlighten all modern Bible comprehension. This city of the body, where the Son of Soul, spelled S-U-N, of soul, sank to its death on the cross of matter to re-arise in a new birth, was called the City of the Sun, or in Greek, Heliopolis. but in the Egyptian, Anu. The name was given to an actual Egyptian city where the rites of the death, burial, and resurrection of Osiris or Horus were enacted each year. But the name bore a theological significance before it was given to a geographical town. The name is obviously made up of Nu, spelled N-U. The name for the mother heaven, or empty space, or abyss of nothingness, and Alpha, privative meaning, as in thousands of words, not. Anu would then mean not nothingness, or a world of concrete actuality, the world of physical, substantial manifestation. Precisely such a world it is in which units of virginal consciousness go to their death and then rise again. Anu is then the physical body of man on earth. The soul descends out of the waters of the abyss of the Nun, or space in its undifferentiated unity, which is the sign and name of all things negative. The Nun, spelled N-U-N, is indeed our Nun, spelled N-O-N-E. Life, in the completeness of its unity, is negative. To become positively manifest, it must differentiate itself into duality, establish positive-negative tension, and later split up into untold multiplicity. This brings out the significance of the biblical word multiply. You see, life cannot manifest itself in concrete forms until it multiplies itself endlessly. Unit life of deity must break itself up into infinite fragments in order to fill empty space with a multitude of worlds and beings of different natures. The primal sea, or mother, or Mary, must engender a multitudinous progeny to spawn the limitless shoals of organic fish worlds. And this is the meaning of the promise given to Abraham that his seed should multiply till it filled the earth with offspring countless as the sands of the seashore. And if life was symboled by bread as the first birth and by fish as the second, then we might expect to find in old religious typology the allegory of a Christ figure multiplying loaves and fishes. Are you surprised to find that the gospel Jesus does this very thing, multiplying the 5 loaves and 2 small fishes to feed a multitude? This is absolutely astonishing in all conscience. But it yields in wonder to the next datum of comparative religion, which came to our notice as a further tie between the Bible and antecedent Egyptian mythology. Who can adequately measure the seriousness of the challenge which this item of scholarship presents to gospel historicity? For a discovery of sensational interest came to light when a passage was found in the Book of the Dead, which gave to Anu the characteristic designation, the place of multiplying bread. Here in the long silent tomes of old Egypt was found the original, the prototype of the miracle of the loaves and the fishes in the Gospels of Christianity. And a meaning never before apprehended had to be read into this New Testament wonder. At last, we were instructed to catch in the middle the miracle, the sense that the physical body, as Anu, was the place where the corpus of the Christ deific power was broken into an infinite number of fragments and distributed out among a multitude of creatures in hungered after a 3 days fast or deprivation of the food of spiritual life in their sojourn in the 3 kingdoms, the mineral, vegetable, and animal, before reaching the plane of mind. And so there you have the first 4 races. We, according to the mysteries, are the 5th root race and must move in the new millennium, in the new world, in the new age, into the sixth root race. Here are all the elements of the inner meaning of the Christian Eucharist, the broken but multiplied fragments of the body of the God, distributed to feed hungry humanity, and as humanity is composed of 12 groups of divine conscious units, there were gathered up 12 baskets of fragments. And this episode of the Christ's ostensible life is found to be Egyptian in origin and meaning and symbolic in character. But new implications arise and lead us on to more startling disclosures. You see, the Hebrews came along and appropriated Egyptian material during their so-called captivity. They picked up the name Anu, and fitting it back into its zodiacal setting as Virgo, they called it the house of bread. This required their adding to Anu their word for house, which, as anyone knows, is Beth. This yields us Beth Anu. Now, it is a fact of common philological knowledge that the ancient Greek and Egyptian U is rendered as Y. When the words are brought over into English, the U became a Y, and Beth Anu now stands before us as the Bethany of the Gospels. Bethany is thus just the sign of Virgo as the house of bread, the home of the great star Spica, the head of wheat. Lechem. Lechem is bread in everyday Hebrew. The Christ was born in Bethany, or Bethlehem, the astrological house of bread. Later, it seems that the two signs, Virgo and Pisces, had their symbols, bread and fish, were almost interchangeably confused or commingled in the symbolic imagery. This was natural, since the two signs represented the same body of man in its two aspects of dying and being reborn, and the two processes are confusedly interblended. And that's where we'll leave off tonight, ladies and gentlemen. We will, again, do this tomorrow night. Good night.
You're listening to the Hour of the Time. I'm William Cooper. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have pen and paper. Tonight we're going to continue where we left off last night, and we're going to call this The Lost Light number 3. I'm going to be reading to you verbatim from the 1910 Volume 12 issue of the New Age magazine, which is the official publication of the Supreme Council of the 33rd Degree of the Southern Jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. And what you're going to hear, well, it should cause you to raise an eyebrow. It should turn on light bulbs in your head. It should sound alarms. It should help you to understand how we have come to this point in time where this great nation is being destroyed from within, not from without, ladies and gentlemen. And that's the way it's always been here. So, get comfortable. Get ready. Open your mind. And once again, the bell tolls for you. I advise you to listen. The Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. Of those who look beneath the surface of the Masonic movement, it becomes clear that this great secret fraternity is an order partly religious and moral, partly mystic, which dates back to the dim past. Indeed, there are many who claim that its stream can be traced to the fountainhead of that great hierarchy, supposed to have had its origin in India, that land to which may be attributed so many of the thought motives that sway humanity. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, I'm reading from the 1910 Volume 12, January to June, New Age magazine, which is the official magazine of the Supreme Council of the 33rd degree of the Southern Jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. Soul knowledge is what the wisest of the world have ever been seeking, and it is what they will ever be seeking until our well-worn planet reaches dissolution. It embraces a realization of the deity in all creation and a recognition of the interrelation between God and between man and his brother man. Therefore, this search stands back of all the faiths and religions, and many and devious have been the roads over which the seekers have passed, each choosing the pathway best suited to his nature. For their particular glimmer of this great light, many have laid down their lives. Because of their longing for this inner vision, many have abandoned the world and lived in monasteries or deserts, or have isolated themselves in mountain fastnesses. It matters not whether we examine the records of pagan or Christian countries. Everywhere we find mention of these mystics, visionaries, dreamers, who have counted the pleasures of life as dross and the hidden truth as all in all, and have groped on wisely or blindly, as the case might be, in their quest of this science of the soul. There is no doubt that but each religion caught some of the light, and with it kindled its individual torch. Afterwards, the crystallizing process of form laid stone after stone around that torch, until an impenetrable wall hemmed it on every side, and its illuminating rays were either deadened or extinguished. As we pass in review all the beliefs, facets, denominations which have arisen and waned, we know that the way of each was too limited, and the man-made dogma more prized than the spirit within. Thus, as we move back through the ages, granting the good here and the pity of it all there, we stand at last before the fountainhead, the great wisdom. It limits neither breadth nor scope of any man. It allows to everyone the fullest soul development of which he is capable. Following it, all must grow. This ancient theosophy may be regarded as the source of God knowledge and of soul knowledge. From it extends the chain that can be followed link by link through all the religious creeds, humanitarian movements, and secret societies. It is the sacred bond connecting one with another, beginning with the spiritual hierarchy, considered by students of the Orient as a grand communion of perfect souls. This great wisdom has flowed steadily on. From it have come the sons of God, the saviors of the world. And ladies and gentlemen, that will give you some indication of what they believe themselves to be, and why they believe that it is them that must decide the future of all humanity, and not us, whom they call the profane. I continue. These progressive ones have been the founders of all religious belief, and the reason of its diversity lies in the fact that the inner secret has been revealed only so far as the receiver could understand. We find Christ stating to his apostles, "I have many things to say unto you, but ye cannot bear them now. while old Jewish records claim that the chapter on creation was to be expounded to only one hearer. Thus we learn that the great mysteries were always preserved for the enlightened few who could hold and follow the truth in all purity and were destined to become the teachers of mankind. According to the Reverend Dr. Oliver, Freemasonry was the great original system through which the Spirit of God moved among the sons of men, and by which the soul climbed up to God. We find him making this assertion, quote, "The mysteries of all nations were originally the same and diversified only by accidental circumstances of local situation and political economy," end quote. Now this same authority states that many signs and symbols of the rites of Freemasonry have been discovered among the remaining landmarks of the antediluvian world. He believes it to have been practiced at the attempted erection of the Tower of Babel and at the dispersion scattered far and wide among the different settlements. Research shows that in remotest antiquity, the art of building was considered sacred and was carried on by priests. As examples of this may be cited the Ionian architects, the Dionysian artificers, and the operative members among the Eleusinian mystics and the Pythagorean and Essenian associations. The priests and builders in these societies were always connected, and we find most of the famous ruins of the past ascribed to the Ionian and Dionysian artisans and artificers, while the pyramids of Egypt bear witness to the magnitude of the builder's art among the pharaohs, where the priesthood was dominant. Indeed, it is to the pastos in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid which irresistibly leads us to a belief that Freemasonry existed among the builders and priests of Egypt, for we find the chief ceremony of the Masons typified by this pastos, and are compelled to acknowledge that the doctrine implied is the same which connects the apparently distinct mysteries. All of these societies used symbols from the art of building. They were divided into lodges, characterized by different names, and they had words and signs by which they could recognize the brethren of the order. They had also high degrees and rights, which were hidden from all but the more advanced of the confederation, and were shrouded under the impenetrable mask of secrecy. They followed the same mode of instructing the ignorant by allegory, symbol, and fable. All seemed addicted to a use of amulets, talismans, and magic. They were all averse to committing their greatest secrets to writing. All were endeavoring to impress a system of morality, and lastly, all recognized immortality of the soul and a future state of rewards and punishments. This they had in common with what is now Masonry, or the science of light. Gradually, corruption crept into the practices, and the divisions grew to regard certain allegories and symbols as the chief point in the religion, and what was intended as a representative sign was changed into a god to be worshipped. But while perversion and even depravity prevailed, there were still many great souls who followed the secret inner doctrine and acted as conduits for the maintenance and flow of the river of light. Moses was himself a priest of Egypt, and there is a legend to the effect that Christ was an Essene and versed in all the learning of the Alexandrian priesthood. Buddha, Lao Tse, Zoroaster, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, and the Gnostics all preached the sacred doctrine. The soul's climb to the divine. Life, light, and love were the three steps all these teachers considered necessary. The world has not the slightest conception of half the spiritual work carried on by the mystic fraternities. Down beneath the old idolatries lay the secret doctrine, and a few great true men among the corrupted priesthood held it unpolluted in the depths of their hearts. Thus, struggling under a superstructure of evil, the great principle lay as a first cause. the Eleusinian, the Dionysian, the Ionian, and the Egyptian mysteries, as well as the religious practices of the Far Orient, were all derived from it. These priesthoods appear to have exchanged communication with each other in all ancient times, and there were certain ties between them reaching from the fastnesses of the Indian adepts to the dim woodland retreats of the Druids. When we consider all these facts, a disturbing question arises. How did the Society of Masons free itself from this shroud of idolatry and in the end shake off the bonds of all religious form? The answer probably lies in the historically recorded fact that in the year 714 BC, in the days of Numa, a college of artisans was founded at Rome. The original members of this association were invited to come from Greece and settle in the imperial city to teach the art of building. As the Grecian builders belonged to the Eleusinian mysteries, it seems natural to suppose that men of high and noble soul, and who held the secret doctrine in its purity and were distressed by the degradations it suffered at the hands of the majority of its followers, were the ones to respond to this invitation and leave their own country. When they established themselves in Rome, they brought with them the secret doctrine and formed a mystic society that had various degrees and a language of symbols drawn from their trade, but which was freer from the evil practices they had deplored in the mysteries. Transplanted in Rome, they were no longer priests, but a college of master artisans, although still connected with the priesthood by that hidden religious science which both possessed in common. The legend that Christ was an Essene has already been mentioned, and as an Essene, versed in all that secret science which aims at bringing to pass the perfection of the human race. And I'm going to repeat that. Which aims at bringing to pass the perfection of the human race. He chose the most ethical of his apostles and entrusted it to them. The divine principle thus passed into the keeping of the early church of the Christian era and was handed on through the priesthood of the Church of Christ as it had been through the pagan priesthoods. The proof of this lies in the fact that many of the writings of the early church show that the fathers of the Christian religion understood and practiced occultism. Some of their most advanced thinkers, as the Abbé Lecour, even cutting themselves adrift from the institution when it insisted on the narrowing process of crystallization. Admitting the mutual possession of the same divine ethical principle, we see that when the old beliefs gave way to Christianity, the Roman artisans were connected with the new church by this hidden doctrine. Through the early ages of Christianity, we find traveling architects and builders who moved from country to country to erect the great religious edifices, and these wandering artisans were the descendants of the college founded by Numa. They called themselves traveling Freemasons. Today they call themselves fellow travelers. Now, many authentic historical statements prove that these guilds of builders in the Middle East carried on some secret religion as well as their trade, and were connected with the Christian church up to the 13th century, when the narrowed dogma of the ecclesiastical body and the persecutions of these differing in tenets led the Guild of Masons, then becoming speculative instead of operative, to throw off the bondage of the church. Most authorities believe it to have been at this stage in its development that the great secret fraternity adopted the name of Freemasons and became a moral society instead of a band following a particular craft, while at the same time they retained the symbols of the trade they no longer practiced. It is proved beyond any doubt that the Emperor Rudolph I, in the year 1275, authorized an order of non-operative Masons, and in the century following, many brotherhoods of the same kind were legally established. The most generally accepted opinion is that the present body of Freemasons, which is less mystic than formerly, was rearranged in the year 1717. We find that their charter of Cologne contains this passage, quote, "The Brotherhood, or the order of Freemason brothers, bound together according to St. John's holy rule, traces its origin neither from the Templars nor from any other spiritual or temporal knightly order, but is older than all similar orders, and has long existed in Palestine and Greece, as well as in various parts of the Roman Empire," end quote. And in the absolute meaning of this statement, it is correct, ladies and gentlemen. It does not trace its origin to the Templars. However, it was the Templars who brought it from the Middle East to the European continent. Through this statement, we stand again face to face with the pre-Christian secret doctrine. This growth of the Great Brotherhood through the purely Masonic channels of the Middle Ages, changing the name Freemasons when it threw off all allegiance to the church and became non-operative, appears the best founded theory and the one most reasonable and plausible. There are many, however, who believe that the Freemasons came into existence either through the Order of Knights Templars or else through the Rosicrucians, adopting symbols and practices copied, not inherited, from the art of building. And undoubtedly a similarity in connection between the belief and organization of the Templars and Freemasons can easily be traced, yet there seems scarcely convincing proof that the latter developed from the former. Indeed, the burden of evidence tends to prove that the Templar growth owes its origin to the Masons. And ladies and gentlemen, that is true. As the Templars gained the knowledge of the ancient mysteries in the Middle East, brought it to Europe, and dispersed it from there. Freemasonry did not come from the Templars, yet it moved through the Templars from its original place of development in the Middle East, brought there from the Far East. I continue. These Templars were a religious and military body of knights which was founded during the First Crusade in the early years of the 12th century by Hugh de Payens and Geoffrey de Saint Adamere. And ladies and gentlemen, that is a false statement. A totally false statement. That just flat is not true. The Knights Templars were commissioned by the King of Jerusalem on the Temple Mount. Originally, there were only 9 knights. And they worked for many years on the Temple Mount and in the tunnels and passageways beneath the Temple Mount. Many believed that they were looking for the treasure of the old Temple of Solomon that was supposedly secreted away when the Romans destroyed it. And that could be true. But the truth is, they were commissioned by the King of Jerusalem. They were not a religious order. In fact, they were not accepted by the Catholic Church until many years later, when they became so wealthy and so powerful that the Pope needed them as an ally. That is the truth. And if you study the history of the Templars, you will soon find that statement is the fact and not the statement in here. Hugh de Payens was the first Grand Master of the Knights Templars, but he did not found the Templars. I continue. There were 9 knights in this little band when it was first established, and they bound themselves together by the strict rule of St. Augustine. As some authorities claim that Hugh de Payens was himself a Mason, there were probably distinct Masonic features about the early ceremonies of these knights, whose chief aim was to protect the pilgrims in Palestine, and who therefore styled themselves Knights of Christ. And that also is a false statement, ladies and gentlemen. They had nothing to do with the church until the Pope summoned them and commissioned them to protect the pilgrims on their way to Palestine, which the Knights Templars seldom, if ever, did, ladies and gentlemen. Instead, They engaged themselves in battle, and at times were even allies and confidants of Saladin, who was supposed to be the Muslim enemy of the Christians in the Middle East. So this account, written by a Freemason for the official tome of Freemasonry in this country, has some errors. And you must take that into account in all of it. If there's one error in here, there may be more. And so far, we found two. I continue. At this point in the Templar history, we must once more turn to that legend which claims that Jesus the Christ was an Essene and versed in all the mysteries of the Alexandrian priesthood. When he presented himself before the scribes, Pharisees, and priests in Jerusalem, it is believed that he showed them how the laws of Moses had been perverted and the secret doctrine denied by the practices and teachings of the Levites. And he tore down the veil which hid the truth from the people, and so far as they could understand, instructed them in the great principles of God and light and love. Then, choosing the most trustworthy and advanced of his apostles, he committed to them what the masses could not comprehend, the secret doctrine, and placed them under his beloved disciple, St. John. So runs this Christian legend. And that is not true either, ladies and gentlemen, because he placed them, according to the church, under his apostle Peter, if you'll remember correctly. Now, all through this, there's one thing that you should have already understood. Freemasons are not Christians. Not one Freemason in this world is a Christian if he follows the teachings and doctrines of the Freemasonic Lodge. Now, he may be a member of the lodge in the lower degrees and still go to a Christian church and consider himself to be Christian if he has done no studying of the symbols or the lessons that are taught in the lodge and is just there for material benefit or for comradeship, as some of them are. The true understanding lies at the highest degrees. And of course, this was written by a very highly degreed member of the southern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. I continue. St. John was the one apostle who never left the East, and his small band of followers kept the doctrine and initiation that had been entrusted to them by the great Master in all purity and wholeness, such as was not to be found in the teachings of the other apostles. And that is where the fraternal organization of St. John of Jerusalem comes from, ladies and gentlemen, and at times Freemasons will call themselves followers of St. John. And when they do that, you mistakenly interpret it as a declaration of Christianity. But I assure you, it is just the opposite. Now, once again, I want you all to understand, I don't care who you are, I don't care what religion you practice at all. I believe in freedom. And I believe that your ultimate judgment will be by God, not by me. Judge not, lest ye be judged. My beef is with the lies and the deceptions. My beef is with the manipulations. My beef is with the coming enslavement of the human race by these people in order to reach what they believe is the perfection of the human race and the preservation of the natural resources of the world. Most of these are just excuses for seizing the reins of power of the world and taking over, if you will. It's the same old battle that's always been fought throughout the history of the earth. Only there's more deception today than there ever has been in the history of the world. And there are more so-called educated people who are dumber than the dumbest serf who ever lived in the Dark Ages when it comes to this battle. I continue. The men of this little Eastern church styled themselves Johannite Christians and lived on in Palestine. They felt a special gratitude to Hugh de Payens and his knights for befriending the pilgrims to the Holy Lands, and so they rewarded the Templars with the treasures of knowledge they had hoarded through 1,200 years. And there's the admission that they brought the mysteries to Europe. Hugh de Payens was instructed in all the primitive teachings and ethics of Jesus, declared a patriarchal apostle, and placed in the line of succession from John the Evangelist. And it was these degrees of initiation and rules of the temples which brought the famous and terrible persecution upon the order 2 centuries later. But folks, when they talk about ethics of Jesus or ethics of the Christ, they're not talking about the Jesus of the Christian church. They're talking about a master, an ascended master, incarnated in the soul of a human to teach humanity. It is not that Jesus and not that Christ that these people are referring to. I continue. When that disastrous period arrived and most of the masters and templars of note had been tortured or burned alive, and the institution crushed by the commands of the Romish Church, those Templars who escaped are supposed to have taken refuge with Robert Bruce and joined the Guild of Masons in Scotland, which was through them reorganized into Freemasons. Thus it is that some authorities consider the great fraternity to have grown out of the Knights Templars. And that is not true. The Knights Templars brought the fraternity to Europe, and so it moved through them. It did not originate with them. It originated in the dim mists of the history of humanity. Yet, on the other hand, it is hardly credible that a powerful body like the Masons, which had weathered storms and opposition and stood the suspicion of church and state, should allow itself to be dominated and totally changed by a small band of crushed refugees. And that is their mistake. The Templars were by no means crushed. They just moved underground with all their wealth and power, and their vast fleets became the pirates that sailed the 7 seas. And you all wondered where the pirate treasures went. You see, these pirates didn't just raid ships and get a few gold pieces here and there. They raided the great Spanish galleons. They raided the ships full of wealth and treasures from the east. They measured and sailed down on every kind of ship, carrying every kind of goods and money and wealth and metals and silk that they could find. And all of this wealth vanished, ladies and gentlemen, for the pirates never were wealthy. And you visit their bastions where they all came together as brothers. Did you ever wonder why the pirates never warred amongst themselves? This wealth was funneled right back in to the Templar Order, underground and through the Masonic lodges, to work their will upon the world. And it still happens that way. Don't go away. I'll be back after this short pause. Now remember, ladies and gentlemen, if you go to your uncle or your brother or your father or your grandfather and ask them about the truth of these things,
You will not be told the truth. They cannot tell you the truth. They are sworn to secrecy upon penalty of death. And if they ask them about this blood oath that they take, and they tell you, well, it's just some silly oath, and we just do it for ceremonial reasons, do you really believe that? And if that's the truth, do they mean their oath that they swear upon a Bible in a court of law? Do they mean their oath if they promise you something? Or if they swear to you that something is true or false? A grown man does not give a blood oath unless he means it, ladies and gentlemen. And with the orders of co-masonry, women are included in this also. The Order of the Eastern Star and many others. So don't expect them to tell you the truth. They cannot. They cannot and will not. Yet they have written it over the years, and I have slowly but surely exposed it to you in their own writing, in their own words, over the years. These people are by far the greatest group of chronic liars that have ever lived upon the face of this earth. Manipulators, deceivers. And who is the great deceiver? I continue. Everyone, however, must admit that it is extremely likely these persecuted Templars tinged some of the existing forms and ceremonies with the knowledge and practices of their order. And I can assure you that that is true. The rite of strict observance was doubtless added from their affiliation with Freemasonry, and there can be little question but that the degrees of this Templar rite were high ones, intimately connected with the mystic doctrine. Yet it is about this same rite of strict observance that there is so much controversy. The very materialistic among the Freemasons denying that it ever existed, while those more mystic by nature have no hesitation in acknowledging it. The matter is still a debatable point in the great brotherhood, but in their own writing passed down through the ages, there is no debate. It is clearly true. This much, however, seems clear. The Templars had a Masonic impulse back of their foundation, flourished for 200 years as a separate institution, and then returned, as it were, to the fold, a shattered remnant. Therefore, it would appear a baseless supposition that Freemasonry was derived from Templar sources. An equally untenable theory is that it was a development from the Rosicrucian Society. Again, as with the Templars, it is probable that the Rosicrucians also owed their existence to the Masonic River of Light, although in their ceremonials and practices they differed more materially. As has been previously stated, men have always been on the search for soul knowledge, and the spirit of the Rosicrucians, the mystic seekers, has existed for all known time, though not at first represented in a definite established society. This seeking necessitated the conquest of mind, body, and soul, and only those who proved by this means that they were worthy were considered fit for higher things. The Rosicrucian spirit moved by way of the secret doctrine, by way of the old religions and philosophies, and by the way of Masons and other mystic brotherhoods. We find the spirit among the Hermetic seers, the Magi, the sages of Chaldea, and the old Semitic and Chinese civilizations. Melchizedek, whom the Rosicrucians considered their first Grand Master, tried to show the mystic truth and rich philosophy to the multitude, without regard to the fitness of the time or man. Afterwards, when he looked about him, he beheld a startling wilderness of beliefs. Certain among his followers had seized one truth, and others yet another. Each had been made into a god before which men worshipped. The purity of the teaching remained only in a few great minds. These saw that the wondrous secret doctrine could not be paraded before an ignorant multitude. They realized that it must be preserved in the hearts of the few, and so we only obtain occasional glimpses of great masters when the veil lifts a little, and the Christ, the Buddha, and the other foremost religious teachers move for a while over the world stage. Yet always, wherever this veil is lifted, we see vaguely the despair that the lofty ones must suffer from the souls who will not be taught. And we recognize likewise that persecution and even the stake comes often as the reward of those who would better mankind. Thus we become aware of the reason why we so seldom catch these glimpses through the veil. Those great enough to be the world's Savior are only born at rare intervals. And here you see some of their arrogance, ladies and gentlemen. If they go and teach their religion, and religion it is, and it is rejected by someone, then these are the souls who will not be taught, and those who are teaching it are suffering the rejection of these souls. Arrogant, extremely arrogant. Once again, we find a religion that condemns everyone who will not believe their dogma outright. And it is dogma, ladies and gentlemen, and like all religions, none of it can be proven. None of it at all. In fact, quite a bit of it can absolutely be proven to be false, with no problem whatsoever, by even the simplest mind. I continue. The spirit of the Rosicrucians was moving, as we have seen, through many ages. It breathed secretly among those Masons who inclined towards the mystic visions, but only came into the open when the great brotherhood dared call itself Freemasons. Then it was that Christian Rosenkreutz organized the society, and in 1614 or 1615 wrote the famous Fama Fraternitas. We have also seen how Masonry was at first both operative and mystic. Gradually a change took place, and in the time of the Rosenkreutz, the more intensely mystic of mind separated from the others and became known as Rosicrucians, while the main body left behind called themselves no longer traveling Freemasons, but Freemasons, without any qualifying term whatever. And yet, when they meet secretly or on the road or in public, one of their identifying phrases is, fellow traveler, or do you travel much? And of course, the answer is yes. I travel toward the east, seeking more light, and on and on and on. And this is just one of the many, many, many ways that they identify themselves to each other. It is also the same term used in communist cells, ladies and gentlemen, because they're all the same.